The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whispering Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are reviewing the Survivor cards in Horror in High Gear, the third Mythos pack in the Innsmouth Conspiracy cycle. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. A quick reminder of how we rate cards here on The Whispering Darkness. The best of the best get an Elder Sign, while the worst of the worst get an Auto Fail, and the cards in between receive a +1, 0, or Elder Thing, respectively. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these player card reviews. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Without further ado, let's get started. There are two Survivor cards in the pack, the first of which is Unrelenting. It is a skill that costs 1 experience point. It has a wild skill icon and the practice trait. Max 1 committed per test. After you commit Unrelenting to a skill test, search the Chaos bag for up to 3 non-auto-fail Chaos tokens of your choice and seal them on Unrelenting. If all 3 tokens sealed on Unrelenting are +1, 0, Bless, and or Elder Sign tokens, draw 2 cards. Release all tokens sealed here after this test ends. This card had me at draw 2 cards because survivors do not have that much card draw. So any card that's going to draw you cards is immediately going to attract my attention. But once you start digging into this one a little bit, man, this is crazy in Silas.
Card is crazy in general, but yeah, it's also ridiculous in Silas. I mean, obviously there's the I'm gonna seal blessed tokens, or I'm gonna seal the +1 and some blessed tokens and draw a couple cards. But there's also the added use of sealing a -6, a -8, and another -6 or something like that if you're playing on hard or expert mode. Like, this card is just so good. When you need to pass tests, you can pass tests, and when you feel that you're comfortable enough to pass the test regardless of what's in the bag, then you just put all the extra +1 and Bless or Elder Sign tokens and draw cards with it. This card is just insane.
Like you said, if you don't need the draw, you could use it to seal 3 potentially problematic tokens. Like, any token you need to seal, you can. Like, if you're playing Lost in Time and Space and you don't want to be attacked by Yogg-Sothoth, it's just like, no problem. I'll just play Unrelenting, seal is it the tablet in that one that's bad, or the Elder Thing? Either way, you just seal it and, forget about it. The nice thing is you don't like so many cards in these packs. You need to play blessed tokens in order to draw to trigger them. You don't need that with this card because it does work off of +1s, 0s, and Elder Signs. So if your deck has nothing to do with the bless mechanic, you can still play this card. Silas, it gets ridiculous because he can seal the tokens and then draw a token and then bounce this card back to his hand to do it all over again, that is just crazy. It's just like,
it's ridiculous.
Seal 3 tokens on every skill test for the foreseeable future. That is just crazy. But I mean, you've got investigators like Amanda, because it does have the practice trait. She can play this, and having this on the table for 3 skill tests, that's pretty good. You mentioned Min is another candidate for this one.
Mandy can take this if she decides to go with the Survivor off class. Tony can take this. There's so many investigators that can take this card that can make good use of it. Then why wouldn't you play it?
Yeah, and then of course Silas is the obvious one to abuse this, simply because he has recursion tech built in for skills, but survivors have access to so many different ways of recurring these cards that I mean, York could bring this one back repeatedly, I think.
Silas can too if he draws Elder Signs when he's not committing Unrelentings.
Yeah. I mean, you've got what's the card from Path to Carcosa? The name just slipped my mind, but I mean, you can exchange that for this. It's
scavenging, right? Oh no, scavenging is just items.
Yeah, it'll come to me. It'll appear up in the blank space there. But yeah, man, I think is this our first Elder Sign of the pack?
I mean, it was the first one for me. This card's ridiculous.
Yeah, this is very, very good, and good in a lot of different investigators. That, I think, that's the big difference between a lot of these cards that are okay and a stellar card like this one, that you can play this in so many different investigators and leverage it for such good stuff that while Silas is the obvious one, he is on the card after all. But the other one, the other investigators can use this as well. The second survivor card in the pack is Signum Crucis. This is another skill. This one costs 2 experience points. Wild skill icon, practiced and blessed traits. Commit only to a skill test you are performing, and only if the difficulty of that test is higher than your base skill value. After you commit Signum Crucis to a skill test, add X blessed tokens to the chaos bag. X is the difference between the skill test difficulty and your base skill value. Here we have another one that synergizes with a whole bunch of investigators, Amanda and Mateo, due to the practiced and blessed traits. We've already talked about Silas abusing these sorts of skill cards. Again, here's another one where he can commit this to a skill test, add some blessed tokens, bounce it back to his hand, and rinse and repeat as many times as necessary. You can commit this to in combination with cards like Double or Nothing, Drawing Thin, Quick Learner, Unrelenting, to boost the skill test difficulty. And then if you're playing with Drawing Thin, you get to draw cards, gain resources, and add blessed tokens to the bag. Another pretty nice survivor skill.
Yeah, I was going to say this is very similar to Rise to the Occasion from some Dunwich pack. Was it Blood in the Altar? I forget. Yeah, this card's, I think, unlike Rise to the Occasion, I think this card is much better in the deck that you want it in, because you can just add, like you were saying, you can add so many blessed tokens in one go. And with Silas or another investigator that can recur it over and over again, this card can add lots of blessed tokens. And
yeah, I mean, Calvin can add a ton, even on a simple even Frozen in Fear or whatnot. I mean, you dump 3 in there. Against some of the more difficult willpower skill tests, you're adding 5 blessed tokens, and like there aren't. I think that makes this one certainly has the potential to add the most blessed tokens if you're playing somebody like Calvin. I mean, Preston's the same way. He has very low base skill values. Amanda's in the same boat. So if you're looking to add, I mean, Amanda, she can put this under her and play it, commit it to 3 skill tests in one turn, and potentially, depending on what those skill tests are, even a simple, I'm going to investigate this 5 shroud location. That's she's a 2.
Mm-hmm.
So you've added 9 blessed tokens to the bag in 3 actions,
which is pretty good.
That's pretty damn good
for one card too. And like you were saying earlier, Silas can abuse this with a similar thing. He could investigate and bounce it back to his hand, add a bunch of blessed tokens, investigate again, do it again, and you could just kind of rinse and repeat. And this is probably the card that I think a lot of blessed oriented decks are probably going to use to generate enough blessed tokens, because this is one of the most consistent ways of repeatedly doing that.
Yeah,
outside of Sister Mary, of course. But
I mean, I think its value does. I mean, if you're not playing a dedicated blessed deck, the value of this probably goes down a little bit, because the value of those tokens is simply not going to be. I don't think blessed tokens are valuable enough on their own. But if you're playing like a dedicated blessed deck that's trying to leverage those tokens, and we've seen quite a few cards at this point that do that, then you want a card like this. If you're not playing those cards, then paying the 2 XP for this is like, you're going to get some value out of it, but probably not nearly enough to justify it. And if you're playing investigators with low, average to above average skill values, the value of this drops a little bit as well, because you're simply, if you're playing, I'm trying to think offhand of somebody, like if you're playing York and he's largely fighting and you're wanting to play this card, you're just not going to get as much value out of it as if you're playing somebody like Calvin, who can reliably add a literal ton of blast tokens to the bag on any test that he does.
Yeah, true. It's not for every deck, and the decks that don't want this, I do thankfully have a parallel in Rise to the Occasion. So, what would you rate this card?
That's man, probably in the Blessed deck, it's an Elder Sign, I think, but otherwise, I'd probably drop it to a +1. It's hard to. I mean, the Blessed tokens themselves, I don't think are super valuable. I sort of assume that you're playing this in a deck that is going to be leveraging those tokens to do other amazing things. I think in those sorts of decks, it's an Elder Sign. Maybe, I mean, it might even go down to a +1 or a 0 if you're not playing those sorts of, if you're not really dedicated to it. I don't know if I'd pick up this card.
Yeah, I think this card is an enabler for sure. This is definitely like a card that you use as part of an engine or a combo piece. And aside from that, I don't think there's much use for it. But that being said, the decks that are going to use this is going to be a linchpin in those decks, like you were saying. So I'm torn. I think overall I'd give it a 0 just because its use case is very specific. But in the decks that use it, it's very good.
Yeah, I think maybe Elder Sign is a bit high. I mean, you look at something like Unrelenting, which is definitely an Elder Sign candidate, and it's just so good. And this one is more, it does enable Blessed decks to do what they do best, but the value of those Blessed tokens depends a lot on what else your deck is doing. I don't think just adding Blessed tokens for the sake of Blessed tokens is good enough. So yeah, maybe Elder Sign's a bit high. Probably I think +1 or 0 would be, I think +1 definitely in a dedicated Blessed deck for sure. I might go with Elder Sign +1, but other than that, yeah, 0 I think is where this card would be. That's going to do it for our look at the Survivor cards in Horror and High Gear. Very good cards. Survivors have received many a good card over the year, and this is a very, very solid pack for them. If you are playing a Survivor, or you enjoy playing Survivors, and you are looking for a couple of very awesome cards that you might want to add to your deck, you can't go wrong with this pack. Unrelenting is stupid good in Silas, and stupid good in a lot of other investigators as well. The ability to seal tokens, any token you want, at a very low cost of 1 experience point is very good, especially if you enjoy playing at those higher difficulty levels where the tokens can get quite nasty. And if you're playing the Blessed deck and you need Blessed tokens, you can't really go wrong with Signum Crucis.
Very true. The only other thing that I would add to these cards is that they're both practice traits. So if you like to play Amanda Sharp, or if you like to play Min, and you like to play Practice Makes Perfect, this is also a great pack for you.
Yeah. The traits really make these cards quite a bit more flexible than the initial. I guess your first impression would lead you to believe. So what do you, just a few quick thoughts on the pack as a whole? Where do you think, how do you think it did?
I think overall the pack has some very strong cards. It's also got some very low lows too. A lot of these Innsmouth packs have been very volatile from like a grading perspective, I feel. Have you been getting that impression too?
Yeah, I find a lot of the cards it's very difficult to judge. I think largely the problem I'm having with a lot of these cards is that they tend to be super good in 1 or 2 investigators, and not worth your time in most of the others. And so it's difficult to grade them from that perspective when you're like, hey, this card could be amazing in X Investigator, but nobody else wants it. And so it's like, sure, but I also wonder whether, I mean, the card pool has grown so much now that I think it's getting progressively more difficult for the designers to make a card like Unrelenting that is going to be good in multiple investigators without pushing it so it's busted. I think it's much easier for them to make a card, say, for a particular investigator, and then that way they can say, okay, we're going to give, I'm going to use Curse of Aeons as an example here, but just because it does seem so tailored towards Gym. It's just like, we're going to create this card that will be good in Gym and probably nobody else will play. And we can do that because we have a large pool of investigators now. I guess the problem with that philosophy is that you get into this position where if you don't play Gym or have no interest in playing Gym or Silas or whichever, these cards really don't offer you very much, which is I think problematic.
Yeah, and I think the other problem with Innsmouth too is that if you don't like Bless and Curse, like a lot of these cards are also huge duds for you. I feel like this cycle particularly is problematic because you're kind of you're burning the candle from both ends, right? Like, I think in Dream Eaters we did definitely start to see more of the cards be tailored towards specific investigators, and now we're not only are we tailoring cards to investigators, but we're also tailoring cards to a specific game mechanic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why it's refreshing to see a card like Unrelenting that is good regardless of whether you play Bless or Curse at all. It's a card that can go in pretty much any deck regardless of what you own.
Yeah, and I that's one aspect of this card that I really like, is that they found a way to make a card good and interesting, but still interact with the new mechanic too. And I don't think there's been a card like this that interacts with curse tokens in the same way.
Yeah, there have been very few cards, I think, that you can play. The only one that occurs to me would be something like Manipulate Destiny that came out. Was it Into Deep or Devil Reef? That keys off of auto fails and Elder Signs in addition to Bless and Curse. So even if you don't play with those mechanics, you can still include the card if you like that sort of effect. So it's I'm looking forward to, it'll be interesting to see what we have. Like, we have 2 packs left after this one. I'd sort of assume we're going to get, the Mystics are going to be getting more upgrades for the suite of Mystic assets that we saw released earlier this cycle. So not too sure if there's going to be much, much interesting in terms of Mystics, but some of the other cards do look interesting and powerful.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I thought that these reviews would get easier as we delved further into the cycle. You know, once we kind of like had a firmer grasp on how the Bless and Curse tokens work, but I kind of almost feel more lost now that we've gotten further into the cycle. Like, the cards feel harder to evaluate almost.
Yeah, I felt that a lot with the last pack that we did. It really felt like difficult to judge where the cards stood. This one seems a little bit easier, but I haven't really played around with the Bless or Curse mechanic yet, and so it's some of these cards feel a little bit more difficult to judge than others.